In German we say Guten Morgen ohne Sorgen. Bonjour, bonjour sans souci. And I hope you do not have to worry anything about this wonderful morning. The 5 days of rain obviously are not the correct forecast, because so far we had only an hour or so to become wet, and we are back to better times. This morning we speak on artificial intelligence. I qualify best as a moderator because I have no idea of what it is all about, except that my friend Grigory Mezetsnikov gave me this very nice new publication of his, which I recommend reading. V4, the Visegrad 4 countries at the time of polycrisis. But this is not what, it's really it's valuable empirical stuff to read, and you become more knowledgeable doing so. But what he was specifically proud about was that the cover image is AI generated. So I asked him, Grigory, what does it mean that this is AI generated? Could anybody tell the difference looking at this cover page? Or how did you go about this? How did you order? How did you manage to get this AI generated cover page? And he said, well, actually, I don't know. We have this guy who knows best of how to handle it. And so we just asked him, and he communicated this to the machines. And so this is the result. Maybe we've learned something about the mysteries of generate things by artificial intelligence. We have 3 excellent speakers and commentators here on the panel. I start with Katy Hayward, who will give the main talk, and we have 2 elaborate comments and on this keynote. Katy is a professor of political, well, she's this generation, she's the young generation. It is obvious that you are the youngest generation. She's a professor of political sociology at Queen's University at Belfast, Northern Ireland, and also the co-director of the Center for International Borders Research. She's a fellow of the Senator George Mitchell Institute for Global Peace, Security and Justice, and an Eisenhower Fellow. Has written numerous books, articles, policy reports, and so on. And also speaks a lot to media, policy advice, academic audiences worldwide on the impact of European integration and of Brexit on peace, democratic processes, governance, and cross-border cooperation in Ireland and the Kingdom. So we're very much looking forward to what you will have to say, and then allow having this commented by our 2.
Thank you very much, Bernd.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I want to acknowledge that these images that I have up here are also generated by AI. When I put in the search terms AI and democracy, these are the rather dystopian images that emerge from that. So I want to express my gratitude at the very beginning for the Europe's Futures Fellowship, which has enabled me to respond to something that I think is profoundly disturbing, not just in terms of the images that we get from AI, but in terms of the challenge posed by AI to our work as academics. And I'm particularly grateful to the Europe's Futures Fellowship because I wouldn't have been able to do this otherwise. I wouldn't have had the time or space to do so in my university. And more to the point, I don't think my university would be encouraging me to do this. Some of what I'm going to say will probably be discomforting to my employer for reasons I'll explain later. What stimulated my shift in responding to the challenges to democracy by looking at AI was last year, starting to receive essays from students that were clearly generated by AI. A year on, what's different now is that I am struggling to tell the difference between those essays that have been submitted by students who've tried and those who've just used AI. And the fact that I'm struggling to distinguish between them is profoundly concerning. Moreover, I am also being encouraged to use AI as an academic, and I think that is disturbing too. And this isn't, I'm going to speak as an academic, but of course this isn't a personal matter as a sociologist. You know, it's a societal one. There's something that we need to consider as societies, and particularly for those of us who work with information, who realize the value and importance of communicating information, and the value of knowledge for democracy. We can see that there are challenges here that we do need to address. I recognize that most analysis of the way that AI poses a challenge to democracy center on such things as privacy, freedom of expression, bias, misinformation, etc. And those are all very important. But I'm going a little bit more to the root of the matter, which is about how we use information and gather information, and more particularly about the need for human intelligence and protecting human intelligence amid it all. So many of the means by which we will need to tackle the challenges posed by AI in relation to security risks and human rights, etc., all of those depend on the rigorous application of human intelligence. And my concern is if we don't think about the challenge posed by AI to human intelligence, we'll hurtle towards a place in which most of the intelligence that we use is artificial, i.e. it's fake or it's mock intelligence. And we'll not only be unable to correct artificial intelligence and what it's telling us, but we'll be unable to tell the difference. And indeed, we'll be unable or increasingly unable to offer the alternative. And fundamental to this, I think, is the institution of the university. So both in the way that we educate students and, of course, in the way that we ourselves gather evidence and develop expertise. And I think as academics, or speaking personally, and particularly from a university in the UK and Ireland, I think we're in many ways culpable for the vulnerability that society now faces with respect to AI. So my premise is, or my argument is, that we need to foster the conditions for discernment in the university as a first step towards addressing the challenge. And so in this paper I'm going to consider why is the university important, where has it failed, what is AI and the challenges posed by it, and then what might be done to address it. So first of all, why is the university important? So one thing I love about being in a library and actually reading books is that you accidentally come across things. And I accidentally came across this article written by John Dewey, whom you know as a philosopher, but he was very passionate about education and particularly about education from a young age. So this, as you can see, is an article from an article he wrote in the elementary school teacher, so for young children. And he was saying his arguments about democracy and education. And you can see here the quote, "We naturally associate democracy, to be sure, with freedom of action. But freedom of action without freed capacity of thought behind it is only chaos." And he went on to describe what he saw as the spiritual basis of democracy, as being the efficacy and the responsibility of freed intelligence. I think the university has a unique part to play in ensuring the efficacy and the responsibility of freed intelligence. And thus it also has a unique role in the public sphere in two ways: providing the education of citizens and providing evidence for policymaking or trusted, impartial expertise to inform that policymaking. Both contributions, when done well, reflect and facilitate the advancement of knowledge, or as Ashby describes it, the thin stream of excellence on which the intellectual health of the nation ultimately depends. If that function is not being performed, if that thin stream dries up, or if that intelligence or capacity of thought is not free, then the public good of the university is diminished, and so too is its right to be seen as a source of authority. In the absence of the powerful, potentially critical authority of the university, a government can act more freely without fearing contradiction. As I researched this topic, what became clear is that the university has already lost much of its credibility as an institution upholding democracy, because it's not only becoming less likely to contradict the powerful, but it's increasingly unable to give freedom to human intelligence. What's more, the threat of artificial intelligence is so direct because we've chosen to give up autonomy and freedom of thought. Specifically, we've not only inculcated, but modeled and perpetuated the paradigm of neoliberal capitalism. Universities can still be in place and functioning, but hollowed out and toothless effectively. And in this instance, I think we're in danger of mindlessly pulling out our own teeth. How is it that human thought has become so uncommon in university education and research? Today, Bojanić identifies 4 causes of this condition of endemic thoughtlessness, and I mentioned this when we had the seminar on EVM. First, there's 4 causes. First, there's the tyranny of mediocrity. So basically the pap that we churn out, many types of written, visual, verbal outputs today. And the mediocre quality of this relates in many ways to the digital age. So the scale and the sources of information are vast. And these now include increasingly information generated by machine. The second contribution to mediocrity is the ways that technology has affected social behavior. So Bojanić describes the contemporary technical civilization as a civilization of facilitation, which contributes to intellectual idleness. Mediocrity is not only predominant, but it's rarely challenged. I'd go a little further, just as an aside, and say that in the digital age, not only have words become separated from their meaning, they've become more important than meaning, or what's meant by their use. So we are increasingly uninterested in intent. It's just whether somebody uses a particular word that we respond to that. The nuances of meaning are completely lost. So ultimately, it's not that machines' language processing capabilities have equaled our own. It's that we've chosen to diminish our intellectual capacity for language use. There's a superficiality there. The second cause of thoughtlessness is the elevation of pragmatism, oriented towards the user and the market. The primary criteria for determining the relevance of academic knowledge is its utility, and ultimately potential to sell it for profit. This is closely related to the third cause, which is measurability. So all strata in public universities have become accustomed to the saturation of neoliberal rationality and metrics. So the quality of academic work is all too often judged in terms of quantitative markers. And we could list them off, right? PhD completion times, teaching evaluation scores, impact factors, retention rates, graduate earnings potentials, et cetera, were all measured by these quantitative markers. And more particularly, how this places us in relation to our competitors. Our competitors, of course, are our colleagues and our collaborators. This logic sees activities associated with critical knowledge replaced with practices that prioritize the efficient and controlled management of information. So bureaucratic control is replacing freedom and trust in university. I'm not saying anything new here, we're all very familiar with this. The last cause of thoughtlessness that Bojanić identifies is mercantilism. So if the university's outputs are measured, the standards are set by the marketplace. So academics and graduates and degrees and articles, they're all products and commodities. So accordingly, we churn out papers with less care and diligence than before, and then we contribute to the piles of data that overwhelm each other and students. And this just adds to noise rather than shedding light on anything. And hence, quite how appreciative students are of easy ways by which they can navigate all these mountains of data. So in sum, the neoliberalization of higher education has diminished the power and the freedom of human intelligence. We've refused to think forward or to consider the bigger picture, or maybe to use the whole of our brains. If the causes of thoughtlessness are mediocrity, pragmatism, measurability, and mercantilism, it has particular consequences. And this is sort of ultimately what I was thinking about in terms of the fruits of thoughtfulness, if you like, and the ways that we see sort of characteristics, I think, of the thoughtlessness in university, partly in the way that we teach and what we teach and how, but also what we're assessing and how we're assessing it, and then also what we're producing ourselves. So a lack of depth, so superficiality, functionality, something serving a purpose rather than thinking about it in the longer term in terms of its value, lack of originality, a certain predictability, competitiveness at the heart of it all, and convenience as well. As we will see, all of these fruits are perfectly ripe for replicability by AI. Artificial intelligence is fundamentally different to types of technological advance we've seen heretofore. Technology has replaced humans in certain functions, like in manufacturing, or enhanced their capabilities, such as microsurgery, or enabled them to do things that are entirely new, such as fly. At the heart of such developments is the notion that human experience and capacity are enhanced by the capabilities of the machine. What makes AI different is that it does all the above, so it replaces, enhances, enables what we can do, plus it can learn. Its capacities increase with human intervention or direction, but ultimately it begins to do something itself, and this is the definition from the OECD. So you can see machine-based, but can make predictions, recommendations, or decisions that influence our environments. They interact with us and act on our environment. Often they appear to operate autonomously, and they can adapt their behavior by learning. So this is suggesting a certain cognitive process. Most of what we talk about, or what I'm talking about with respect to AI, is large language models, LLMs. They work by identifying patterns and relationships between words and sentences. They do this initially by an algorithm that converts language into tokens of data, be they words or groups of words or parts of words or spaces or punctuation. Those tokens are converted into numerical form, and then they can be mapped in a certain way that then enables patterns to be identified. One thing we mustn't ever lose sight of is the fact that words and language has no meaning to the machine. Words are just tokens for the machine. So all that exists for artificial intelligence are the signifiers, never the signified. We might talk about that a bit later. Semiotics. So most AI systems that we're familiar with and are increasingly dependent on are discriminative models. So they classify data and, for example, being able to list the main themes in a topic. But also by identifying patterns, they can predict on the grounds of probability what's likely to come next. So this is how predictive text works. Increasingly, we're moving beyond machine learning to deep learning. So with deep learning, the machine itself can identify relevant features from unlabeled data, so you don't have to have human intervention from the beginning, and it finds patterns in that data without human supervision. And this is when you begin to get people, sort of architects of AI systems, saying that for them, they find it quite unnerving to see the machine working itself and identifying its own, thinking its own readings of the data and identifying patterns that it's found itself. Deep learning is behind the generative models of AI, which use algorithms to generate content in response to a prompt, so such as ChatGPT. So when asked, this could produce a decent essay on the life cycle of the fruit fly, or it could facilitate the interception of someone's daily walk to work in a place with ubiquitous CCTV and lax privacy laws. I mean, there's many extremes here. The discriminative and generative functions of AI bring obvious benefits, many of them in relation to the problems that have been created by the conditions of modern capitalism, i.e. too much information, too little time. We're turning to technological solutions to address problems that arise from the ways we engage with technology and have allowed it to change our behavior and expectations. What's interesting for our purpose, though, is not the apparent cognitive powers gained by the machine, but how we as humans relate to the machine's power and how that changes the way we behave and relate to one another, and indeed the way that we think. Despite knowing full well that the machine is not thinking, we're beginning to treat it as if it were. So the risk then lies in terms of what we stop doing or being able to do, which goes back to thoughtlessness. Social science education in the neoliberal university has come to be increasingly centered on the capacity of an individual to write cogently, identify relevant material, summarize it, and apply it to answering a specific question. This is precisely what AI can do for us now, in theory. Skills are the bare foundations of our academic work, and this is why we as academics are increasingly targeted by the same systems. And again, I mentioned in September, about how I'd received an email from Maya from gentext.ai saying that as an academic, I'm always striving to be the best researcher and teacher I can be, and gentext.ai can help me be that person through automatic text generation, smart summarization, advanced proofreading, and language capabilities. The question is, why wouldn't I draw upon this? And even if I didn't think about the ethical dilemmas very seriously, if I'm tempted to use this, then so too are my colleagues or my competitors, as the neoliberal paradigm would have me think of them. This is an ethical question, so maybe I'll turn to my university for some advice. How am I meant to approach this? My university says, all the world is changing. We have created an AI hub where you can go and you can get online. So I went to the AI hub. And here I found a trailblazer guide for staff, surviving and thriving in the AI era. And all of the images are like this, so sort of Lara Croft-esque academic with her servant robot carrying the heavy burden of academic, yeah. Anyway, it's full of, it's not really guidance. It says basically, we'd like you to help us discover and work with us in thinking about how AI might assist you. Again, in being the best academic you can be, being a better teacher, etc. And there are many unnerving things in this. But under the heading at the end, and it's an appendix, Current Realities and Future Forecasts, it references the growing integration of AI into other software, such as plugins for word processing, such as Gentext AI is. And it describes the effects as blurring the notion of authorship and pushing the boundaries of collaborative intelligence. So it's more insidious than I thought before. It's not that the academic's role as the author or intellectual will be replaced, but it will become enmeshed with the machine and therefore inseparable from it. So a couple of weeks ago, as a typical academic, I had a looming deadline and a sense of being overwhelmed and having too little time. And so I decided to accept the offer of Maya from Gentext AI, and I clicked on the icon that's now in Microsoft Word. And I asked it to write me a paper on artificial intelligence and democracy. Yeah. This is what it came up with. So now, bear in mind, it's apparently scoured 200 million articles that are peer-reviewed papers and articles to generate this. It has 163 words, which is rather fewer than I was hoping for, especially because I paid the subscription for it. But anyway, this is what it comes up with, and I don't really have time to go through it. But essentially, this is so familiar to me because this is essentially it's the basis of the sort of essays I've been reading this year. So it has some key words, quite weighty words, so you think there's something behind that, but there's nothing behind it in the sense that it can note basically the tokens that come up frequently, but it basically repeats itself. You're sort of waiting for something of meaning to be said, and it's never said. There's sort of repetition there. One thing that is also interesting as well, it comes up with 2 citations out of the 200 million. Apparently it's scoured. And you can see they're very One is about artificial intelligence in pharmaceutical and healthcare research, and the other is about it in democracy in Latin America. And when I looked at these articles, they've been replicated many times. So it's not just that they're open access, you can find them on many, many platforms. So that's the judgment of whether something's worth citing and whether it's significant in this. So this is the co-author that I'm meant to work alongside. And you can see generative AI is mimicking, in many ways, the author. And the way that the university would like students to use AI, and the way that I'm encouraged to encourage my students to use AI, and we are encouraged to encourage them, is basically as trainers for AI. So what we're meant to do is get this, or allow them to get this basic basis for their essay, and then say, well, what's missing? How can you elaborate on that? But of course, how they go and elaborate on that is by Google. So and then they will come up with those same two strange articles. And I was thinking this a little bit yesterday, and this might be a little bit of an adjunct, but essentially, a bit of the way it works is when Christoph gave his summary history yesterday, which was very helpful and appreciated by many of us, but the way it was added to or enhanced or corrected by others, that's a sign of knowledge at work, right, and interaction. And there's something of the way that that it's more than the accumulation of information that's important here. It's about what people see as relatively significant. And with the artificial intelligence, there's no sense of relativity other than frequency. So being able to distinguish between what's valuable and not is challenging. So what can be done? If it's the spiritual basis of democracy that we are seeking to nurture, so the efficacy and the responsibility of freed intelligence, it's not inappropriate, I suggest, that we draw upon a quality that is typically associated with religious practice, i.e. that of discernment. So discernment is a process that separates, weighs up, and scrutinizes before approving something. It's a demanding process. And with respect to the sort of the religious dimensions of it, the idea is that you can conceive something that is not objectively visible without that process of discernment. And I think discernment stands in direct contrast to the fruits of thoughtlessness. So what is needed is depth rather than superficiality, so something to have meaning. Patience rather than convenience and ease and effort. A future focus rather than unoriginality. And this is one thing Doherty in particular writes really passionately about the role of the university in democracy. And one thing he's saying is that we have to be future-oriented all the time. What we're doing is for future generations, it's not for ourselves. And I think we've rather lost that. Creativity rather than functionality. Togetherness, which is more than collaboration, because I think something about being in one place physically is important, rather than competitiveness, and diversity or dissent rather than predictability. All of these stand in great contrast to what artificial intelligence can offer us. Discernment cannot come through individual labor, but has to come in relationship with others. There's a physicality to it, a social dimension to it, and a temporal depth as well as intellectual endeavor behind it. And that's already very uncommon with the instantaneously generated information we've come to mistake for intelligence. We need to seek the democracy of mind, as Dewey calls it. If that is lost, then we are truly unfree. And as Dewey says, of course, freedom of action without freedom of thought is chaos. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. We all have understood by now how artificial intelligence is Katy's time-saving new work partner.
That's right, yeah.
The time-saving new work partner. And we saw the tangible outcome of
yes.
product coming out of this. So congratulations. By the way, apropos time-saving, we decided autonomously that the delay which we started, more than a quarter of an hour, will not be at the expense of the speakers and the commentators, but at your expense. And so we will finish not at 11 o'clock, but 11:18, just to, you have some more time to comment on our comments. Now, the first commentator is Luke Cooper, Europe's Futures Fellow at the cohort 1819. So you're the first generation of fellows, our elderly brother, so to speak. Our elderly brother is an associate professorial research fellow with the Conflict and Civicness Research Group. Research group and director of the Peace Reps Ukraine program. He is one of the rare species nowadays, I think, of the historical sociologist and political scientist who works on the transformation within and between societies. He has been responsible for the project Responsible Deal, where and how to best protect and integrate Syrian refugees. He launched the London School of Economics Conflict Zone podcast series and worked as a researcher at the LSE projects Visions of Europe, Social Shaping of Governance, Capitalism, Civil Society and War, and has also quite some campaigning and policy advocacy experience. I only mention that he's a co-founder of Another Europe is Possible and other advocacy projects dealing with the impact of Brexit and promoting international solidarity with Ukraine. Working on nationalism, authoritarianism, the theory of uneven and combined development, and so on. So he is a great scholar. Whether he's into AI, I don't know. Certainly more than we youngsters at the later IWM cohort. So please, Luke, it's yours.
Sorry, we were just joking that I've worked on such a broad range of topics that they're not artificial intelligence. So unqualified for this particular panelist. So here goes. I mean, that was a wonderful presentation, Katy, and I know that in the university world there's an enormous amount of discussion and contention on this. I found the Queen's University Belfast Guide to Labour Productivity Growth in the university absolutely. The Queen's University Belfast Guide to Labour Productivity Growth in the university, particularly disturbing and dystopian. I think, at least in my experience, ethnographic experience of the neoliberal university over the years, let's say, I mean, academic staff are often, quite conservative in their approach to change, more broadly, I would say, and that's kind of reflected in the attitudes to artificial intelligence. So, not opinion polling based, but I'd say overwhelmingly in UK higher education, your average academic will be negative about this development. And university managers, senior managers are artificial intelligence curious, let's say, but also I think concerned in lots of cases for its implication on the quality of public education. I mean, I work very closely on the Ukraine program with an institution in Ukraine called the Kiev School of Economics, and they're very much in this kind of Silicon Valley tech disruptor mindset that's, I think, for those of you in the room that have engaged the Ukrainian kind of intellectual sphere and IT sector and business community, it's probably quite representative of a kind of mindset and thinking about new tech and disruptive tech. So they actually run workshops for their students on how to use artificial intelligence to improve the quality of essays. They've run various programs in schools doing the same thing. They herald the use of artificial intelligence and ChatGPT to improve the quality of English language translation at the kind of final stage of production. So, if you've come across very well written stuff by the KSC, it's quite likely that it might be machine assisted. And I suppose my question to you is that it was a very negative and challenging presentation, but I can see their point in some of the functionality, that in a way, if you're thinking about artificial intelligence as a kind of global leveler, it's a means by which to kind of challenge the sort of intellectual predominance, say, of the English Anglosphere in the global academic community, that if you use this sort of neoliberal market term, that new entrants to the marketplace can, immediately apply the most advanced technology and therefore leap ahead, potentially, those old dinosaurs. So it has this kind of productive, dynamic potential. So I guess that's my first question, to you. And then I guess the second theme of the comment, I'm still, I don't know what I think about this, so I'm thinking out loud really, but, there's been a lot of discussion in the business world and amongst, global political economists of the productivity crisis in the West. And in the last 2 or 3 years, there's definitely this hope that artificial intelligence has the potential to unlock and unleash productivity that has been lacking in Western economies for some time. And so I wonder if this is like a kind of turning point and conjuncture, because I can see that there is a kind of implication. So a lot of the new technological developments of the last 15 years that have been pretty revolutionary haven't really delivered proper productivity growth in the true sense of the word. If you think about the platform economy and the platform revolution, what that's basically doing is finding in utilizing new technology in order to increase the exploitation of labor rather than improve the output per hour of that labor. So, you see this in the use of platforms that allow you to get help at home, for instance, like domestic workers or your classic being Uber drivers and so on. It doesn't improve the productivity of the taxi industry or the domestic worker industry, but it does provide a means by which capital can more effectively generate and increase value from those sectors. So it increases the rate of exploitation. And so with some of this new AI technology, precisely because of the things that you've identified, now the hope is that really dramatic improvements in output, say in pharmaceutical technologies, you just use artificial intelligence to map extraordinary amounts of data, and through that mapping process and through that learning process, it identifies patterns that have a revolutionary impact on the development of those outputs. So, cancer treatments or cancer vaccines and so on that everyone's talking about. Is there now at this conjuncture and turning point just going to be a kind of surge and breakthrough in productivity that we see in terms of actual outputs? And I suppose it seems to me that we might be on the cusp of that. And then I suppose to bring this back, and my final point then, is where does this leave the university as a place in which society can kind of reflect on itself? Because it seems to me that there is a particular type of knowledge or understanding of knowledge that's very commodified and commercialized that we can see generating significant productivity improvements over the next few years. But you're talking about a different form of knowledge that isn't commercializable, that is kind of interhuman. And that, I think I agree with you, does seem to be kind of in peril in this next stage of the technological revolution. So thank you so much for the presentation.
Now, I am glad to announce our third speaker this morning, Sanja Bojanić, whom we all know for years as in her role as a host of our gatherings and meetings, and she does play this role in a most unobtrusive and elegant and hospitable way. But today, she's center stage as an intellectual, and so I want to just inform you on some of her credentials. She's professor at the Academy of Applied Arts of the University of Rijeka, engaged in the philosophy of culture, focusing on contemporary gender, racial, and class issues, and how they intensify social and affective inequalities. She completed her initial studies in philosophy, later earning an MA in hypermedia studies and a PhD from the Centre d'études féminines et d'études de genre at the University of Paris 8, Paris 8. Her work spans interdisciplinary research involving experimental artistic practices, queer studies, affect theory, and she has, her career has included positions at the Institut National d'Histoire de l'Art, Louvre, Paris, the Nouvel Observateur, Laboratory for Evaluation and Development of Digital Editing at the Maison des Sciences de l'Homme, Paris Nord, Saint-Denis. Her current position as an executive director of the Center for Advanced Studies, Southeast Europe, Cres, spell it okay, University of Rijeka. So she has taught at the universities of Aberdeen and Paris 8. She teaches semiotics, new media, theories and practices, visual methodologies, which I'm very interested in, the Academy of Applied Arts in Rijeka. Has had projects financed by the European Commission, the Volkswagen Foundation, UNESCO, and other partners, and is the author of several books and over 40 peer-reviewed papers. So, please, it's your... Today you are the star and not the host.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much, Bernd, and Kate, thank you very much for your insightful paper. I will run through certain case studies to approach the idea of our exchange and the conversation, but maybe first of all, just give a few hints on democracy and academia, more or less, not university as such, but then academia, and then within academia, liberal arts. Because what we need in academia and all that you're reaching for is liberal arts within academia. And these liberal arts goes hand in hand with the liberal democracy. That's what you said and quoted with Dewey as well. So basically, three pillars of liberal arts are critical thinking, ethical reasoning, and civic awareness. And all three are really bridging what we need in democracy, and especially in these new digital democracies, new, futures, Europe's future. And I'm not going to enumerate each segment of these three pillars, but then I will go directly to our case study. In 2022, first case study, it was the huge Sony Award for Photography in London, prestigious award, very lucrative. And the person who won the award, a German photographer as well with a huge renommee, Boris Elgerson, just before announcing that he won the prize, he said, look, you're wrong. I generated the AI. It was not me who did it. It was AI who did it. So that was his like Banksy hit. Okay, listen, I can do it. I do it. And I'm very much technically equipped to do it. But you need to educate yourselves as critiques, as evaluators, as reviewers, to be capable of discovering what is what. So that's my first case, recent one. And of course, then the dispute was huge because it's also attached to authorship and all other aspects, again, of what are the heritages of democracy and liberal arts as such. The question of the author, who is the author and who is having that copyright privilege, if the machine can have a copyright as well, which is, well, undoubtedly, we see nowadays that it's possible. And the other case is something that is very familiar to all of you, political scientists or people in media. And this is what actually I want to relate with you and be more in your grounds, is the Cambridge Analytica case. You all remember? So it was more than actually decade. And that was the first huge hit on democracy, and how it happened, and how that was produced. And really no need to go into what happened, because that was Alexander Kagan at the University of Cambridge, a psychologist who actually had provided for his research and the researchers the models for linking and using big data and linking this facial recognition capacity of global surveillance and violating privacies, among other things. And it's not only that they did it for the research purposes, but they sold it to whom? To guys who then brought Trump to power, who brought Brexit to happen, who brought all these huge avalanche things that endangers now, those things that they endanger democracies, like procedural things that are linked to democratic and participatory like elements that we all are fighting for. So this is the thing, how to go along with all that you mentioned about the opposites that we need to develop through human intelligence. And not to forget that artificial intelligence, it's just a calculus that's calculated. So what is there that differentiates specifica between calculus and the human? Well, it's on that affective part. And now we teach our machines and new models, LLM models, to feel, just to avoid this algorithmic biases. But at the end, it's always the human who enters the data into the machine, and the one who entered the data that delivered the so-called paper that you got. It's the accumulation of the data and how the algorithm is formulated, and those keywords are just the remnants of what is the basic way how the sentence is formulated, how the syntax is done. So the responsibility is on us, on those who are experts, and on those who are experts also in the domain of politics, policies, polity. I'm really here trying to find grounds that are the context of what we are discussing at the moment. So yes, you probably can reflect on the Brexit thing and make us go back the confusion that happened. We didn't think that it was so crucial, the role of the AI. But actually, that was the pivotal moment. That was the countage, of course. So the responsibility of those who were institutionally in charge, how to do things, and how then we can live with it. What is the next step? So this is more or less more of a comment, but then I think that we can engage there on a fruitful ground. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks, Sanja. Thank you.
I meant to ask more directly on my second point around. Don't you see some positives to this? Like there must be positives. Say if we use AI to transform cancer treatments. Didn't?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm not going to.
And what others?
Bad thing.
Yeah, so the floor is open. I should mention that I haven't come across the idea so far that liberal arts education may be a prerequisite for liberal democracy. This is something we haven't come across so far. This is in particularly important because what you call the neoliberal thoughtless university kind of, we had all these derogatory remarks, especially in the German-speaking countries on this Orchideenfächer, there are disciplines not worth studying because there is rare plants, rare flowers, precious but rare flowers, and nobody would care and give a damn about this kind of education. So, yeah. Okay. Ivana.
I think that you will hear me without my...
You better sorry.
Can't wait to talk.
I would like to thank you because I find it fascinating and I love that you were so emotional while presenting it because I think it's important, and me as a journalist working a lot and talking and doing a lot of stuff about disinformation, misinformation, Gen AI effect on how our reasoning is going to function is, I think, very fundamental. And if you allow me, when you publish this article, I would like to translate it and publish it in our media, if it's okay, but I think it's important to say. First, on personal note, my mom was a university professor of political economy, and in 1990, 1991, when a war started here, that was not just a quest for democratize the space of former Yugoslavia, but the economic model was introduced at the university, and she was a professor of political economy, and they banned political economy and introduced Samuelson. And I remember her as a young person of 16, as a university professor, crying because they scrapped her field of work, like overnight by a decree. So I think it's of utmost importance to talk about, what academia or universities are going to look like in the future, but not just academia, but overall education, and I want to ask you about that. We have new expressions. You've mentioned and words and meanings. We'll talk about it privately because I found so many things that you touched which are crucial for today's world. we mention now deep learning, learning models, learning capabilities, but we talk about machines that are designed by people to help, at the end, facilitate big data. So I want to ask you, what, after this kind of research and this kind of all the references and cross-literature you've studied, what would, from your point of view, be a good way to approach, you know, the basic elementary learning process from kindergarten? Because in a second, when they get this into hand, we're screwed. Not in a sense that this is necessarily bad. I always think as these things as, you know, tools, these old tools that we use and we know how to use, but the problem is that this is accelerating so fast. And the traditional systems, including educations, are not capable to adapt to this acceleration. And now we have these frictions, but explosions and systemic mindfucks. Excuse my French. Thank you.
Here, I have the question, something in between of the thoughts that Katy and Sanja have been talking about the human component in this. And theoretically, the answer to all the risks would be just develop critical thinking among the students. But first of all, we know that the critical thinking is very abstract, so we still are writing it in each of the projects, but we don't know what it is and or how to really to be sure. Yeah, no, in terms of how to develop it and what to do then with the mental map of a lot of people. But the thinking is that probably we need something additional, because I made immediately parallel for myself, and I would like your reflection, please, that originally Wikipedia was seen as one of the step forward, for the classical, and so many students even made the footnotes for the articles in Wikipedia, because especially for the countries that didn't have a lot of access to the international journals, Wikipedia was becoming the source of knowledge. But then we noticed, I don't know if you had it in your countries, we had it for the last 10 years, a huge problem of Wikipedia wars. Yeah. When people starting during the war changing in the historical articles about the historical things, and not only political things, but even factual things. It's not Kiev Rus, it is Rus, or ancient Rus, in the Russian language articles, for example. In English will be different. So the question is that even if all that knowledge from which artificial intelligence is taking the knowledge is human, what are the barriers that we need to make or can make to avoid the phenomenon like Wikipedia wars or the absence of the critical thinking or the necessity for the professor then 3 times more double checking that it was done by the person or by the artificial intelligence?
Thank you, fascinating panel. 2 short remarks. One on the point that both Katy and Sanja raised in terms of critical thinking is that there's a growing literature of the problem of bullshitting, which is like the enormous, this is flooding from generative AI. And according to a new line of research in disinformation, bullshitting is in fact more dangerous than disinformation and fake news, in the sense that it's like epistemologically nonsense and empty statements and semantically empty statements that just make no sense. And this is which socializes the students if they use a lot generative AI, and that's I think a huge problem. And also it's associated with the belief in fake news. So the ones that found bullshitting more profound, they are more easily fall into fake news. And on Luke's question on what could be the pros of generative AI in the scientific research, I think when it comes to quantitative data processing, for example, it can be utterly useful, even to the extent that it can create you R codes that you can use for processing the data. And I think, for us as researchers and especially as teachers, I think it's a huge challenge how to create new kinds of tasks, where it does not really matter by the end of the day if they use generative AI or not. You focus on the outcome, and we don't know enough, if we are honest to ourselves, about all these algorithms to judge it properly. But I think if we change the perspective and it helps to improve the quality of the product, of the scientific product, by the end of the day, which is probably more with the quantitative research than, let's say, with the philosophical essay, which will be utter bullshitting by the end of the day, but it might also help to improve scientific research.
Thank you. I'm so much enjoying this session because I've sat through so many discussions about AI, I'm sure everybody in the room has, which are either about, well, it's the end of civilization and possibly human life as we know it, or it's the best thing and it's going to drive the economy, and if we don't do it, the Americans will get ahead and we Europeans will be left in the mud. So how fantastic that Katy has taken us to a much deeper, more philosophical level in thinking about this, and also, you know, Peter and others talking about how it affects politics, because it affects how we think. I was just reflecting on Katy's octagons here. Sorry, hexagons. I can't even count anymore. AI does everything like counting for me. And it was occurring to me that actually this is a brilliant kind of intellectual model for two things. One is simply changing the criteria by which academic work, particularly research, is assessed, because this is the opposite of what AI can do. So AI is fast, but what about things that require patience? AI is actually very good at polarizing, so what about things that require togetherness? Generative AI is phenomenally creative, amazing, especially in creating images, which are difficult for us, but it does it all on the basis of patterns. It's all about pattern recognition and learning from huge data sets and then discerning patterns. But actually human beings, often the best scientific and philosophical insights and things that have really changed us are ones where people don't follow the pattern, they break the pattern, they really think about something in a completely new way. So just starting with Socrates, you know, when is a man wise? Well, not because of what he knows, but because of what he doesn't know, and he's aware that he doesn't know. Okay, would that have come out of AI? Possibly not, if the AI had been based on ancient Greek thought at the time. So kind of breaking the pattern kind of creativity and coming up with something that is truly out of the box, which is not based on the bullshit and on the kind of stuff that is repeated. And also this future-oriented thing is also about this, because we're so used to, and our children even more used to, things, it being very easy to just search for something on the basis of essentially the past. But actually the future could be very different. And again, that kind of breaking the pattern of creativity. So I'm just thinking about Wittgenstein, who made a wonderful remark, this is in the Gemischte Bemerkungen, where he says, when we think about the future, we imagine it traveling along a line from this point to some other point in the future. But actually, time does not travel along a line. It travels on a curve we can never see over the horizon, and its direction is constantly changing. And that's perhaps where the human imagination can do something more. And I was also struck by, Katy, how much your principles here on the screen are ones that quite a lot of spiritual traditions have very much sought to cultivate. So Buddhism and Quakerism in the Christian nonconformist tradition are all about discernment and depth and slowness and patience and thinking forward several generations, and not conforming, but finding your own way on the basis of reflection and taking things, you know, and this whole concept of discernment is fundamental to both of those spiritual traditions. So I think you're onto something very deep here. And the one thing I just wanted to ask about is between generative AI and non-generative, because this is something I don't really understand, so I'd really like the experts to comment. I know that in non-generative AI, just automated decision-making of a really basic kind, for example, by the kind that banks use or the kind that the police use for predictive policing, there's this big problem about automated bias, about bias being baked into algorithmic decision-making because it's based on past patterns. So you know the problem, basically. Is that problem also there in generative AI, that because it's being based on the way that humans have approached an issue or a something, have done something, based on patterns, will it also include our prejudices? Or is it possible to somehow prevent the prejudices and the biases to be there? I simply don't know that. In AMD, there are lots of empirical work that shows, yes, predictive policing is based on the idea that ethnically mixed areas have more crime. Therefore, if this is an ethnically mixed area, ethnically mixed people commit more crimes. Okay, so that is an example. Or poorer people default on their loans, for example. But with generative AI, is it also drawing on those kinds of patterns, or does the way that the machines learn from these large language models mean that they don't have to, that they don't include the assumptions and biases inherent in the thinking?
So if I may take up one, does this work? Yeah. Okay. A point Peter Greco raised, his hypothesis, bullshitting worse than false information being given. Let us recall that one of the main alt-right advisors of President Trump, Steve Bannon, he actually invented this idea and flooding the zone with shit. Flooding the zone with shit cannot, I think, knowing so little about artificial intelligence, I think it cannot be done by artificial intelligence alone. It needs some tactical, strategic thinking on the part of political actors to do so, and more or less skillfully. In the German-speaking world, they now call it SNU, strategisch notwendiger Unsinn. And to have people jump on this strategic notwendigen Unsinn, strategically necessary nonsense, and people get at each other's throats, and they're willing up to killing each other for bones of contention around those shit. And, you know, you may have seen Stephen Mao's new book on this trigger points. But this is something which is strategically placed. You do not have to be a conspirational theorist to think that, yes, some people could produce a spin politically so that people start to quarrel over certain completely, in the end, completely irrelevant things, but with great salience, with great emotional involvement and heat, political heat, to distract from what is really les enjeux, what is really at stake. So I just wanted to take up this point of yours. There are others as well. Please.
Well, thank you so much for your questions and comments. I'm greatly encouraged and further stimulated, which is super. So I will try and answer a couple of specific questions before maybe some general reflection. On your point, Heather, about the deep learning and if that minimizes, I think there is a sense that it can reduce the likelihood of bias, but the key point is about the prompts and the way we apply AI. So I think the risks of bias and discrimination are still there, and and I always come back to that point. It's not the machine itself, but it's how we use obviously those capabilities, and being careful in that regard. So I think the superficial level, it is meant to be less because it's not relying on specific training from humans. But there is still the risk, and then how we take that information and use it. Ivana, on your question about kindergarten education is really interesting, and of course Dewey is writing about that, and so much of his article, because it's 1903, but because it's about democracy in education, and he's talking about teachers and their capacity, basically saying that schools aren't democratic, that's part of the problem. And he's talking about teachers and then about the children. And a lot of what he says about, it's a very short article, but what he says about what education should entail for fostering democracy of mind amongst the young children are things that could be obviously equally applicable now, and perhaps more so. So it's about being together and interacting outdoors, etc., etc. But I'll look it up again and I'll share with you what he says. But it's very fundamental things about relationships, relationship building and communication, and about the capacity to make mistakes, that kind of stuff. And I use this quote again in September from Bojanić, which was, I always come back to this, which is about, for all of us, when the power goes off, all our databases will disappear, but education will remain, and it's what are we giving in education that remains aside from the technologies. I'm looking forward to long conversations with you, Sanja. I think so. I think I'm encouraged to think that this model might be have some usefulness. So my intention is to present a version of this paper in my university as my very much belated inaugural lecture as a chair of political sociology. And I can just imagine if I present something like this, then people will think I've totally lost the plot at last. But the idea, if it could be something practical, would be actually quite important, because I think ultimately, as Pelikan says, it's about, we have to begin with self-reformation in the university, and maybe this is a good time to do it, especially if we're feeling overwhelmed by the challenge. And Luke, I totally appreciate, there are many positives from AI, and I wouldn't be in any way think it's all negative by any means whatsoever. But I do think there's a particular challenge for us in social sciences if we're not thinking about what we're doing, and where we should draw the lines of that collaboration, as opposed to just taking it on board in an unthinking way.
Yeah, so I suppose my other question around this would be, how does the environmental transition link in, and could you incorporate that into this paper in some ways? Because basically the enormous energy demands of these technologies puts in question the green transition itself. Like a friend of mine recently got a job at DeepMind in London, Google's AI outfit. And she was telling me very excitedly about this job. She's going to be working on how you can use DeepMind and artificial intelligence to catalyze solutions to the environmental transition and green transition. And I laughed and I was like, well, come on, the best thing you could do for the green transition is turn off DeepMind. And I told her that colleagues of mine at the University of Edinburgh that work on the same research project recently told me that the company that they use to manipulate large data, they run large data on peace processes and peace transition processes. They manipulate it using machine learning tools and artificial intelligence, has started rationing access to the servers because of the enormous energy demands of running single programs. So one of these programs could be equivalent, say, to running a car for 10 miles a day for 18 months, just one program that takes 10 or 15 minutes to run for like 18 months. So it has this extraordinary like energy implication. So the scary thing in terms of the green transition is that you have this AI productivity revolution. You also build more solar panels and more renewable energy infrastructure than you've ever known before. But the demand for energy triples or quadruples as a result of the implementation of these technologies. So I think in terms of your ethical criteria, there could be a way of incorporating this or something into like a kind of energy efficient or green idea of what the university is, because if the university is just generating, you know, enormous new demands for technologies that are so energy greedy that they put climate change and dealing with it in question, then that's also becomes a problem.
It's future-oriented point.
I will just add to that, again, into a philosophical aspect of it, and critical thinking, very literally, and the question of measure. Thinking of Luddists, for example, we all know what was their argument. We cannot fight the machine. We need to find the reasons behind that are making us slaves of our products.
Yes.
So the thing is that it just to be measured. And of course the teachers should be smarter than their students. So it's on us to learn more and to develop more tools for critical thinking so that we can educate students to make a good choice. Speaking of ethical reasoning, and then also to go to raise civic awareness. So it's on us, and fulfilling your picture. That's it. That's it. The responsibility that we have as already in position of choosing what to do, how to put it, like Alexander Keegan did with his models when he sold them to Bannon and for millions, and what we got afterwards. Testing these participatory models in rogue states in Africa or in Middle East and Asia. So it's on us. Thank you very much for your very insightful presentation.
So much. Thank you.
I have two queries to Sanja and to Katy. Sanja, you said not fighting the machines, but what is still unresolved as a query is, you know, you gave this example of the photography award. You know, it's just somebody who said, well, it could have been done by the machine. But what about really, what is your view on the copyright privilege, as you called it, with machines? I think this is, it opens a box of worms.
The whole day.
And to Katy, you know, the way you described the development going on, the thoughtless neoliberal university, mediocrity predominant, rarely challenged, the elevation of pragmatism, the measurability and so on, but basically replacement, freedom and trust. What I also read in this is you describe a bureaucratization of an institution in the Max Weber term of what bureaucratization is. And the flip side of the coin, which you define as a challenge to democratic functioning of the university, but which also it contains, I think, which is not seen by you as much or stressed as much, the democratic, also elements of democratization of the mass university as you know, we have this aristocratic, elitist attitude, and so everybody should be Privatgelehrter, and you do not need to earn money because you are dedicated to your, you know, Berufung instead of a Beruf, you know, all of this. So it's 100 years back to Max Weber, and in a way, this is a development. This may be saddening to some people who had another vision and view and how they would like to have their university being run, including the keys to the cellars where the rare wines are stored, and who has access to what kind of resources in these places. I just mentioned it, you know, isn't there also another side, so to speak, you know, an acceptable side to it? And this is just what bureaucracies are about, for better or worse, and very often for worse. And in 100 years after Kafka, I think rereading, and I would have suggestions of what to start with rereading Kafka, with respect to how universities nowadays are try to be set up and transformed, would be a nice exercise, and would kind of allowing for a more balanced is maybe the wrong word, but you understand what I mean. To see the other side of of what you describe and analyze.
Do you want me to answer that very as succinctly as possible? I mean, I was a very enthusiastic bureaucrat in the university as director of education, and very insistent on my various spreadsheets to ensure that people were teaching enough hours, etc. And I wielded these things to try and persuade senior professors to play their part, to no success, I should say. But I think fundamentally, though, the question is, what is the purpose of that bureaucracy? And at the moment, academic governance of university is absent. So we have people there who are titled, but that question of what is the function of the university vis-a-vis its service to the public here is purely interested now in terms of the marketplace and equipping students to get for the workplace. And therefore, there's just been a lack of a focus on not only something bigger than that and more important and longer term, but also what we're giving up. And when we see that the challenges posed, such as the advantages, but also challenges for AI, and all the dangers in this, bullshitty world, we've sort of we haven't equipped them for that, and we're not doing so. So I do understand. I'm certainly not arguing for an elitism, and I was worried a wee bit about this. If I'm sort of saying, well, let's just places like this so we can discuss these things and enjoy that stimulation. That's not what I'm saying. I think Doherty writes about the delight of enfranchisement from a university degree, and that experience of autonomy and equipping people that way. So it's for the students as much as for the staff, and I don't think it's necessary to say it has to be for a certain elite. It's more about what is the purpose of higher education at all.
Thank you. Is there any urgent or not? Okay. Alberto.
A quick comment when listening to you that tries to look a little bit into the future. There's a lot of technological determinism into this. There's a hype around AI. We see big investment happening. Every second day there's an article saying that there is a hype, but still investors, they go there. In the university are just one pieces of the puzzle. They're going to be users. They're going to be on the demand side. And the question, therefore, is how can we counter this acritical acceptance that the average university will have? Are we going to be seeing some conscientious objectors, professors refusing to use or embrace some of these technologies at the individual level? Are we going to see some mobilization, trade unions of academics and staff personnel rejecting, refusing, creating some mobilization around it? What do you predict, since you're an insider? I'm also an insider in my own universities, but it's a business school, so nobody even dares to say or to pronounce a line from your speech, right? It's completely a taboo. It's a taboo. But you seem to be in a privileged position where some of these ideas, some of these strategies, tactics could emerge. So what do you see as the most promising way to counter this hegemonic AI model that is going to be imposed on us, on our students, with very little capacity of us from, let's say, resisting.
Another thing I know from Croatia, for example, our faculty of engineering and computing and guys who are basically employed by AI companies to develop these models, now we have a thing which is very disturbing. They're taking young students out of their studies, paying them and employing them in big tech organizations and, you know, educating them within the companies for the purpose of whatever they're producing. So we have a huge dropout, as we are, you know, small country, not big universities, dropout of students from tech universities because they're being taken by the big money, you know, to work in the companies, and they're developing them within the companies, not in the universities.
Any more last?
Do you want to answer the question? No, but you have a question.
If not,
I was very interested in what you said about not being able to tell the difference now. Sorry. What you said about being able to tell the difference this year compared to last year in the AI essays. And because I know, do you predict, building on Alberto's question, like, do you predict changes in assessment as a result of this? I think the colleagues that I've spoken to who have run tests around it have so far said that they didn't think that when in the tests that they've run, that the AI essays could get more than, say, a 2-2 in the English like system, i.e. that AI was performing like quite badly. And does that resonate with your experience? But they also caveated by saying that they didn't expect this to stay the same. So, you know, is this mean, like, you know, my lodger at my flat in London, who's an academic, who has now returned to the written exam for his assessments in his courses as a result of AI? And do you see that trend? Because I imagine universities will become really split on this question and how they're approaching it, and academics will too. I mean, who wants to read a handwritten essay with terrible handwriting, you know?
I think we're at risk of making ourselves redundant. That's my key point. So, you know, I could get my lecture written for me. I could set the assignment just written by AI for the student, and then it's marked by AI, which again, the Queen's is encouraging us to use AI in assessment and marking assessments. So the only thing that's learning is the machine. That's my concern. And so we will come to the point where they can say, what are you offering as a social scientist to this? Nothing. So unless we think about it now, seriously and urgently, and say, what is it that we offer that's different? What is human intelligence? Which goes back to the liberal arts points. Did you want to answer the question, Sanja?
It's your session. Thank you.
Thanks, Bernd.
Thank you for having offered us such an exciting morning.
Thank you very much, Bernd.